Today we are going behind enemy lines to get the inside scoop on the Oakland Raiders. We're going to talk to a veritable insider from Oakland. You are listening to the Huddle Up Podcast.
Welcome to the Huddle Up Podcast, your go-to show for all things Broncos.
Fear not, Broncos country. The Huddle Up Podcast is here to console you through this dead time on the NFL calendar. We're here presented by Mile High Huddle 24/7 Sports. I am your host, Chad Jensen. With me is my co-host. He's your Denver Broncos reporter for 24/7 Sports. He is Zack Kelberman. Zach, dude, it has been a slow week.
So give me 1 second. I'm waiting for that tumbleweed to roll on by. It is so dry right now. There is nothing going on. It is the deadest point of the NFL offseason. And even though we expected this, we knew this, it's the same thing every year, it does not make it any easier. I have withdrawals right now. I'm shaky. I'm sweating. I need football. Football needs to get here already.
It's like Lebowski, the intro to The Big Lebowski with the tumbleweed rolling through L.A. I mean, that's a very apropos metaphor you rolled out for us there. But you know what? Listen, here's the upside, is we have doubled down on the analysis side of covering your Denver Broncos, whether it's coming up with interesting angles from some of the things the players and coaches have said during OTAs and minicamp, or going to the film room and breaking down, like just today, for example, Lance Sanderson published a phenomenal film breakdown on outside linebacker, undrafted rookie Jeff Holland, which was very illuminating. So we're taking this opportunity while we're not kind of under pressure because of the news to kind of spread our wings a little bit more and hit some of the analysis stuff. So there's a silver lining. For now, if that's what we can hope for, and deep dive analysis, that's what we're here for, to provide everyone. And Broncos fans should definitely stay tuned for that. But football is just around the corner. Thankfully, June is almost over. We got about a week longer to go. Then it's July, and before you know it, training camp is here. And then that's football every week, every day until the end of February or mid-February. So we're almost there, Broncos country. And I guess that's something we can update the listeners on, as far as Zach and I were talking about this before the show. We're going to introduce our guest here in just a few minutes, get him on the show. But training camp, we got official dates for training camp. I think it was, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, the rookies report July 25th and maybe the 26th, and then the veterans on July 29th. Am I getting that right, or am I missing a date?
27th.
There we go. Here's the man that wrote the piece.
Yeah, first practice the 28th, and then they practice on and off all through mid-August, and they wrap it up after the second preseason game.
There you go. So it'll be here before you know it. In the meantime, you guys, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. And make sure you take some time as well to leave a creative review, whether you're listening to the show on iTunes or Stitcher, iHeart, YouTube. Shout out to the YouTube listeners, wherever you're listening. Just take some time, rate the show, leave a creative review. Absolutely vital in terms of helping us grow the show and reaching new listeners. One last piece of business before we introduce our guest here. We got to say thank you to our sponsor, Audible. You guys go out and get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddleup. You got over 180,000 different titles to choose from. Whether you're on an iPhone, an Android, Kindle, or MP3 player, that's audibletrial.com/huddleup. You guys know I'm a voracious reader. I don't always have time to sit down, turn the pages on the books that I want to read, but Audible gives me the opportunity to do that while I'm doing other things, whether I'm driving, commuting, whatever, at the gym, in the yard, in the kitchen. And right now, for example, I'm listening to a great Russian classic. You guys might at least have heard of it. Maybe you've never taken the time to read it. It's called Crime and Punishment. It doesn't sound very enthralling, but it's one of the best books ever written in the history of literature, and I'm able to listen to it on Audible. So give it a chance. Audible, you get a free book, you get the 30-day free trial because of Huddle Up. So take some time. audibletrial.com/huddleup. All right. So with heavy hitters like Peyton Manning, Alex Smith, these guys are no longer in the AFC West. Of course, Peyton's been gone a couple of years. But the old guard has kind of given way to the new in a sense. And, of course, Phillip Rivers, he's still hanging his hat with the Chargers in L.A., but the division is very much up for grabs. And with that in mind, we want to welcome in Oakland Raiders reporter for 24/7 Sports, Jeff Smith, to help us understand what's going on behind enemy lines with the Oakland Raiders. Jeff, thanks for joining us. What's good, sir?
Hey, I'm doing well, man. How you doing? Everything going all right?
All is well. All is well.
Awesome.
We are stoked to have you on, of course, member of the 24/7 Sports family. Now, the big 2018 news in Oakland, of course, is the arrival of Jon Gruden. That's what everyone's really been talking about the last 6 months, at least from the outside looking in. And we've heard some interesting things, Jeff, about Gruden's return to the Raiders. You know, coming out of the draft, we heard reports that he and Reggie McKenzie, the GM, that they maybe even had separate draft boards. And you take a glance at Oakland's 2018 draft class, and the hall itself, it kind of adds some veracity to that notion. It was kind of an eclectic group of picks there. They're just kind of all over the place. Didn't feel like there was much of a guiding principle, at least from the outside looking in. Now, as someone who's covered the team for a long time, is it true? Have you heard that they had separate boards? And to kind of piggyback on that question, what's the vibe been like in Oakland with Gruden back at the helm?
Yeah, so there were rumblings that the two had, a separate board, but, obviously both Gruden and McKenzie shut that down pretty quickly. They shut it down, but that doesn't mean it's not true, of course. So realistically, it's kind of impossible to tell how that actually played out, what the actual situation was. I would probably assume that Gruden probably had the main final call, if I had to make the assumption. But honestly, both sides have been good to this point in terms of working with each other, it seems. But if something were to go haywire, or they were to have a slow start to the season, or something like that happened, then there's a very, very big chance that things could flip very quickly. So
I always thought Reggie McKenzie did a great job as a GM. Mm-hmm. He had his misses, but I think mostly both as a draft czar and also as a free agent recruiter, I thought he did a pretty good job at the helm. Has that seemed like a pretty good working relationship so far, or has there been some butting of the heads at all, at least publicly?
To this point, everything seems good. It seems like both sides are kind of, doing well together, working well together. And obviously they have the same kind of focuses in mind. I'm sure they've had their fair share of, differences in terms of where they want to focus in, before in free agency, and then of course in the draft and things like that. I'm not 100% sure if Reggie McKenzie was fully on board with taking, 2 offensive linemen in the first 3 rounds or the first 3 picks. But, obviously they've had their differences, and I think McKenzie's done a great job as well. He's done pretty good across the board. Obviously, I think when you have a draft like they had when they landed Mack and Derek Carr, as well as Rodney Hudson. When you have a draft like that, it kind of makes everything else look better. So even when there are mistakes and there are misses, those things kind of overshadow them quite a bit. So, but he has done a good job overall. It's hard to deny that. So,
well, and just real quick on that, I know you got some stuff you want to ask him too, Zach, but our draft analysts are, Mile High Huddle, we're big into the draft. We got a group of guys that really study a lot of film, and they kind of help us in that regard. Guys like Zach and I, who we don't spend as much time watching college tape leading up to the draft.
Not our forte.
That's right. It's just not our forte. But they kind of panned the Colton Miller pick in the first round. Now, again, not really our domain, but do you subscribe to that notion that Oakland reached on Colton, and also, your feedback on the Brandon Parker pick in the 3rd round?
Yeah, absolutely. But honestly, before we go into that, I apologize. I said it was Rodney Hudson that was in the 2014 draft class. It was actually Gabe Jackson, so I just wanted to clarify that. But in terms of the Colton Miller pick, sticking with the offensive line, honestly, Miller it seemed kind of like they wanted McGlinchey out of Notre Dame at number 10 more than likely. But when he came off the board at 9, the most obvious choice was to trade back, and it made sense. And moving back like they did was a great move. But at that point, you had guys like Tremaine Edmonds on the board, Derwin James. There were a lot of options that really could have helped their defense. But instead of going that route, they decided to select a position that they didn't really have a drastic need at. Obviously, they could use a right tackle. They have some veteran depth there right now. But, that's fine. You could probably justify taking Colton Miller there if you really, really say, hey, we need it 100%. We need the future. We need the replacement for Donald Penn. We need someone on the right side for right now. Maybe that's fine. But when you go down to Brandon Parker at the top of the 3rd round, it's hard to get on board with. The move just doesn't make a ton of sense. I think there really could have been there were a lot of other options that could have been better, and especially not trading up for him. I just don't see it. I don't understand it. He may be a great player, but at the time and based on what their needs were, I don't think it made the most sense for them. I mean, I'm sure Broncos fans probably love the fact that they watched them take two offensive linemen in the first two rounds and one pick. So
the thing with me is, like, they traded back. They had many better players on the board at better positions of need, and they traded back to get an offensive tackle who's as raw as they come in Colton Miller. This is a guy who protected Josh Rosen, and he was rawer, if that's a word, than Garrett Bowles came out of Utah last year, and the Broncos fans are all too familiar with him. And to trade back to get Colton Miller and not take a defensive player when you have an aging secondary with every 30-year-old veteran under the sun, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And then they follow that up in two offensive linemen in 3 rounds with someone named Brandon Parker in the 3rd round.
Yeah, there's no way I could. If I were in that situation, or I think if the bulk of Raiders fans even were in that situation, there's no chance that would be the move and that would be the right play. I don't think most coaches would make that play or that move, and it was bold. And I mean, I'll go as far as saying it was bad, even without knowing how good these players are going to be, based on what their needs were and what their overall scheme was and where they stand as a team right now. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of it was more of a, hey, we're going to address the future type move, but, hey, we're not on the same level as a team who's actually contending for a Super Bowl right now. So they have an offense now that is essentially ready to, compete at a high level and compete immediately, but their defense is pretty much just a work in progress still. There's no clear-cut answers that were made, no defining moves that were made. So it's kind of let's hope the offense can score 50 game and the defense can hold up some level of their end of the bargain, which, with Paul Guenther, you can hope that that'll be the case. And they do have some good players there, but it's a lot of risk. There's too much risk involved, and it didn't make a lot of sense at the time. And it still doesn't make a lot of sense now. So
I always thought that Guenther was awesome as a DC in Cincy when Mike Zimmer departed to go coach Minnesota. I think he might do some, make some noise there. It might take a few games to get up to speed, but I always thought he was a good defensive coordinator, sharp mind there.
I think so too. And to be honest with you, I really think that there's a small chance that Gruden, Guenther, the Raiders in general may have gotten they may have caught a little bit of a break with some of the decisions and how things played out. Daryl Worley obviously is a name that comes to mind. They picked him up after the Eagles released him following the trade from the Panthers. And, Worley had the off-field situation, but he's an incredibly talented player. And the thing is, though, is that if he hadn't been released and hadn't landed with the Raiders, then they'd be looking at 100% more than likely having Leon Hall as their number 3 cornerback, which would be, questionable at best, honestly. So, it's not a great spot. There's a lot of questions, a lot of concerns. The defense has me worried. The only good thing for the Raiders and their defense, one of the good things for the Raiders and their defense, is Guenther, like you said. I think he has incredible upside. He's a great coach. I think he has the ability to get the most out of the players that are in the building. But I just don't know if there's actually enough talent there, to be able to overcome these shortcomings that they have right now. So that's my concern.
I think I can speak for all of Broncos country when I say that they're not hoping that Colton Miller pans out when the Raiders saddle the Broncos with everyone's favorite, Menelik Watson. So
hey, for no one's really. I don't think it really matters that much because of the fact that you guys now have Bradley Chubb with Von Miller. So I'm pretty sure that they could put whoever they want on the offensive line, and it's not going to make a difference right away. Yeah. So
hopefully Brandon Parker holds up against them.
Yeah. I don't know what their plan is there. They're going to have to quadruple team him and basically just hope that Derek Carr can throw a screen pass real quick. So that's kind of the only game plan, I'm pretty sure.
Going to be 2 great matchups this year.
Very true. Very true.
Well, let's talk about Derek Carr because I'm a big fan, always have been, of Derek Carr dating back to his time in college. I just think he's a phenomenal arm talent. I like the guy. I think from a character perspective, he's a good dude. It's odd saying that because he wears the silver and black, but you look at his career, 4 years under his belt. He's got 3 times at the Pro Bowl. Last year, of course, he made the Pro Bowl, even though it wasn't a great season. As an alternate, ended up playing in the game and whatnot. But what's your take on Derek Carr heading into year 5? And do you consider him to be one of these young upper echelon NFL quarterbacks?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll be honest with you. I am brutally, brutally honest when it comes to, the actual talent and the upside and these specific players. But one person that I'm not personally wavering on at all is Derek Carr. I think his upside is tremendous. I think his playmaking skills, his instincts, I think everything about him is on that next level. Honestly, he was put in a offense last year that was led by Todd Downing that gave me headaches to watch. It was literally painful. And that's only so much of a shot at Todd Downing. He was a first-year offensive coordinator. He shouldn't have been in that position, to be honest with you. But Carr, purely from a talent standpoint, is one of the most upside of any player in the NFL at the quarterback position. And I think working with Gruden and Greg Olsen again and Brian Callahan is going to do a lot for him. And having these weapons around him, I do think that Carr is going to have the best year of his NFL career to this point. So
I might be in the minority, but I happen to think that Carr has been a little underrated as an NFL quarterback. And I agree with you that physically all the upside is there, and he's shown it. Unlike a player like Paxton Lynch, who has all the physical talent, Carr has actually shown he could be an upper echelon quarterback in the NFL. So a lot of the problems that he had, they weren't necessarily his fault. He has a good playmaking core, but offensive line issues, coaching issues. And they brought in Jon Gruden. They spent $100 million on him to coach up Derek Carr. That was the reason they hired him. Let's not, let's call a spade here. But do you believe, Jeff, that he will flourish under Jon Gruden, Derek Carr?
Yeah, I do, and I think part of it is Gruden, but I think part of it is the fact that I will give Gruden credit for this and the coaching staff credit for this, is that they've put a really, really good group around him. Obviously, as head-scratching as the offensive line picks were, it goes to show just how important to Gruden specifically making sure that they protect Derek Carr really is. So, the protection aspect is one thing, and I don't think that'll be – I don't think that Brandon Parker or Colton Miller are going to make a drastic difference this year. But I do think the fact that they have Jordy Nelson and Martavis Bryant as things stand, and Ryan Switzer, who I think is an underrated type player, who I don't think he'll make a drastic impact in 2018, but I think he has great upside. Just the players that are around him and the upside that's there, I think that's going to help him take a big jump forward in Gruden's system. So I think the two together. But I'm not sure what you guys think about that and what you think about Gruden working with Carr. Obviously, I've probably read a lot more and seen a lot more about what Gruden's done with quarterbacks in the past, but the duo has the potential to do some very, very impressive things.
I mean, he turned Rich Gannon into a MVP quarterback, and this was a guy who, now granted, this was almost 2 decades ago, almost, not quite, but getting there. But Rich Gannon back then, I mean, he was a career journeyman, hadn't really done much as a starter, and under Gruden flourished. And then to add to that resume, he goes to Tampa and takes another journeyman in Johnson and takes him to the Super Bowl, wins a Super Bowl. But after that, the question is, went downhill, could never develop a quarterback. One of the reasons he flamed out in Tampa. So that's, Zach, I see that as one of the things he still has kind of left to prove, that he still is a quarterback whisperer of sorts, notwithstanding, Gruden's QB camp.
I fully agree with that. And the thing was, when Vance Joseph was on the hot seat last year, a lot of Broncos fans were starting to count their chickens and wondering who the next coach was going to be. And of course, Jon Gruden's name kept popping up over and over, based solely on his reputation and his laurels, not the fact that he's been out of the NFL for about a decade now. And I think the game has passed him by just a little bit. It's a totally different NFL now. It's a pass-first league. It's a pass-first sport. It's much different than when he last coached. So he had that football camp, and that was all well and great, but it's different between working on a whiteboard and working on the sideline. So I'm interested to see what he's going to do with Derek Carr, but we cannot know anything right now with that Raiders team, with Carr, with Gruden, until September and the Bulls start flying. I think it could be a good match, certainly better than Jack Del Rio and Derek Carr, but $100 million, though, that could be a little buyer's remorse there.
Jeff, oh, sorry. Go finish your thought.
I was just going to say, you're 100% right. I mean, it was way too much money. But and honestly, Mark Davis basically just said, I don't care how much it costs. This doesn't impact our salary cap. I'm going to pay whatever it takes.
Here's a blank check.
So yeah, exactly. So take basically. I'm assuming that's kind of how the conversation went. He just said, "I want you, no matter what." I don't know if he probably didn't say name your number, but he was going to pay whatever it took, and that's there. You could probably argue that even Bill Belichick isn't worth $100 million over 10 years. So I mean, it's one of those things that the money was, he didn't care. He wanted Gruden. That was it.
You know, it's one thing, too, that the Broncos and the Raiders have in common offensively is the fact that both teams are going to run some variant of the West Coast offense, which is interesting because, you know, that whole approach is slowly becoming an outdated, you know, offensive system in the NFL, as Zach alluded to, with the shotgun, with the read option, the run pass option, the RPOs and all that. It seems to be, you know, evolving away from those systems, and yet here you got Bill Musgrave, former Raiders offensive coordinator, now coordinator in Denver, and Jon Gruden rolling these what are perceived to be these kind of antiquated systems that were great in the 90s, that were great in the early 2000s, back to the forefront. It'll be interesting to see if either team has some success in that regard.
I don't think, in the short term, I think Bill Musgrave is set up for a little more success. And I say that because he's had a year in this team already, in the system, and now he's fully implementing his system with a veteran quarterback in Case Keenum. But it's interesting, that's a great point that Chad brought up, because there's elements of both systems, both schemes in place on both teams, and both have that common denominator with Bill Musgrave.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, I'm definitely on board with what you're saying. It's hard to disagree with you, so...
Well, here in just a second, we have a few more questions we want to ask Zach and I here to Jeff, plus a couple of our listeners have some questions for Jeff as well. But first, let me holler at you about why you got to become a Mile High Huddle VIP subscriber. Our approach, listen up, you guys, it's to covering the Broncos. It's not just about reporting the news, although we pride ourselves on being able to relay to you all the breaking news on the Broncos as it's happening in real time. But we also like to deep dive, break the Broncos down in depth, whether it's all 22 film reviews, X's and O's, deep dive player evaluation. You know, coming out of the draft, we've spent a lot of time breaking down Denver's 2018 draft class, but we save our best and most in-depth content for our VIP subscribers, our premium members. Now, to become a Mile High Huddle VIP 24/7 Sports, get access to 100% of our written analysis and our VIP insider forums, just click on the green banner at the top of the website, click the monthly or annual option, whatever suits you, and from there you'll be locked in. You'll get access to everything we produce, which includes any insider info we pick up along the way. And you guys know, we bust our humps to bring you the best Broncos coverage and analysis on the web. We ask for your support by becoming a VIP subscriber. Pull the trigger. You have our word. You will not be disappointed. Now, real quick, one question that I know is very much on the minds of Broncos country is the whole Marquette King situation. Obviously, the Raiders jettisoned him not long after Gruden was hired and returned to Oakland. Now, King has said that he was cut without ever having even met with Gruden. And, you know, sure, it's hard to get too excited about punters, right? But the drama here is juicy because King's been trolling his old team pretty hard all through the offseason, right? But considering, that no punter has pinned more punts inside the 10-yard line since 2013 than Marquette King, why do you think the Raiders unceremoniously just dumped him like that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. And I think it came down to exactly what you just said. It's the fact that he hadn't, met with Jon Gruden. And I think Gruden just didn't believe that their personalities meshed, to be honest with you. And it's kind of a weird situation, but, I think the Broncos are really going to benefit from that. But I think it just came down to that. That was all it was. I think that Gruden, he saw there's a small, slightly larger cap hit, but I don't think that was the biggest, issue. I think it was more the fact that their personalities weren't going to mesh. So.
And also, no punter. Name one punter in NFL history that's logged more 15-yard penalties than Marquette King. I just think it was a culture change for Jon Gruden, and he didn't want to keep on a very boisterous, a very flamboyant persona in Marquette King, no matter how good he was. And their trash was the Broncos' treasure. Not many all-pro punters are out there. Not many all-pro punters hit the open market in April. So the Broncos got a chance to not only hurt their rival, but help their own team. It was one of my favorite moves of the offseason. It was a no-brainer. He's going to come into Denver now and punt into altitude. But I think, and he admitted that there's still a big revenge factor there. He wants to get back at the Raiders. He's feeling slighted, and I don't blame him. He went into the facility in Oakland to meet with Jon Gruden and not knowing in a couple minutes later he was going to get cut. And when does that happen in the NFL for an all-pro? But I think there was more to play than just his salary cap. I think, that, like Jeff said, the characteristics and the personalities did not mesh at all. And it was surprising, but it was a great move by Denver, and I think it's only going to benefit them in all three phases.
Agreed. I agree. It was a great addition for them. He's gonna obviously cause his his fair share of headaches, I believe, away from the field or off the field and probably on the field, but nothing too crazy or over the top. But he'll probably drive fans a little crazy from time to time. But he's a great punter overall, and that's the most important thing, honestly. So.
Well, Broncos fans who might have missed this, one of the big offseason additions for Oakland was former Packers wideout Jordy Nelson. Of course, Aaron Rodgers was not very thrilled publicly about losing him, and Nelson now steps in and ostensibly replaces Michael Crabtree. But what has the buzz been on Jordy Nelson thus far? You know, OTAs, minicamp, that's all in the books. And do you think he still has something left in the tank?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, if there's one thing that I am very unconcerned about compared to the rest of analysts and all the Raiders, writers, and all that out there, it's probably Jordy Nelson. I think that he's starting to put a lot of people's minds at ease, but he's been great with the younger wide receivers, it seems. He's taken on a leadership role. He's been kind of what Derek Carr needed out of, kind of what he needed out of Michael Crabtree last year, I guess, in terms of that leadership role, and he's done a great job. So I think that overall, Jordy Nelson is probably going to be one of the best additions out of anyone this entire offseason for the Raiders. And I think he's going to have a huge, huge role. And I think he'll get back to that 1,000-yard player and, hit double-digit touchdowns as well. So
you're a bigger fan of him as a complimentary piece than Michael Crabtree?
In terms of playmaking ability, or in terms of what he brings all around? What do you
just a general, a complimentary piece to a playmaker, young playmaker like Amari Cooper? Is he that veteran hand that's going to be the one that steps up as Derek Carr's number 2, or was Michael Crabtree had the higher upside?
Sure. I think Crabtree unquestionably has higher upside. Like in terms of a player, I think that it's hard to argue that Jordy Nelson, who's, going on, he's 33 years old, 34 years old, has higher upside. But Crabtree brings more to the table from an ability to purely dominate a game. But pairing someone like Nelson up, who has, who's a crisp route runner, he's a great all-around player, he's reliable, he's a great red zone target, that type of thing, with someone like Amari Cooper, who has that tremendous upside and that, scary ability to take over a game. He's flashed from time to time, but hasn't really hit that stride fully. Pairing those two up, I think, is really, really going to be a good mesh. I think it could prove to be better than what Crabtree and Cooper brought, because I do think that Crabtree kind of overshadowed Cooper a little bit too much at times, and it's tough to tell. But I like how Jordy and Amari complement each other. I think that's going to be really, really fun to watch.
I mean, he's about as good of a possession receiver that you can find in the NFL right now, and as a veteran, Jordy Nelson's got, his route running ability is phenomenal. He's always had great hands. He might have lost some of that explosive twitch that he had, for a white guy, for a white receiver in the passing game. That might have left him a little bit down the road. There's a reason Green Bay passed on him, or got rid of him. But I think as a player who can step in and be a stabilizing force, you talked about his leadership and just provide that for the Raiders. Jordy Nelson, especially working with Derek Carr, from the outside looking in anyway, it seems like a good fit. Now, we each and every week, Jeff, we have something we call the Mile High Mailbag, where our listeners send in their questions for us. We answer their Burning Broncos questions. We fancy ourselves the football priests. Okay, we answer the Burning Broncos questions in the minds of our listeners. And we got a couple here that I pulled from the bag that I thought would be interesting for you to address, Jeff. And the first one comes from Driscoll Jones on Twitter, @JonesDriscoll. The question is, why is there a comparison? Now, keep in mind this is coming from a very partisan point of view. Why is there a comparison between Miller and Mack? Does Jeff really think Mack is better than Miller?
Okay, so yeah, to be honest with you, a lot of people quickly jump on the whole Khalil Mack's a better player than Von Miller, or flip side, Von Miller's a way better player than Khalil Mack. But honestly, I feel like that's kind of yet to be determined. I mean, it's easy to forget just how young Khalil Mack still is and what his upside is at this moment. Though, I mean, it's really hard to argue the point that Khalil Mack is a purely better all-around player or has done more than Von Miller has. I think that Von Miller is way more well-established, and at this point, I would probably say Von Miller is the better player. That's not to say that Khalil Mack can't become the better player than Von Miller is, but he's also younger, and he still hasn't hit that full stride yet. So I'm interested to see kind of how that plays out and what their careers end up looking like at the end of the line. But I think that Mack and Miller are going to be very, very close when all is said and done. I think that both of them are going to be, right near the top in terms of, most elite defensive playmakers and pass rushers. So
to the point of the question, there's a comparison because Miller and Mack are both play the same position. They both are edge rushers, and they play for rival teams. So there's always going to be a natural, competition between them. I think right now it's subjective to me. Whatever you look for in a player, that's what you're going to land on as a better edge rusher. I happen to think, and I have no horse in the race, no pun intended, that Von Miller is the better edge rusher right now. I just think he brings more as a run defender. I think he brings more as setting the edge. I think he's a better pass rusher. They're both phenomenal players. The two of the best pass rushers in the NFL, and it's not even close, in my opinion. I just think that's my opinion. Everyone has their own. I think Von is just a little ahead of him, but both are going to, like Jeff said, they're going to end their careers either in the Hall of Fame or falling right under them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like comparing a Lambo and a Ferrari, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're really splitting hairs here. But you look at what they did last year. Von Miller finished barely number one according to Pro Football Focus in total quarterback pressures, and right behind him at number two was Khalil Mack. Jeff.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree completely. I understand. My question is, hey, if Bradley Chubb turns out to be a total star, does that hurt Von Miller in the argument of being, better than Khalil Mack down the road after, in 3 years, 4 years, if Mack is still completely dominant and Miller is still dominant, but Bradley Chubb is right there in the mix and, is a great pass rusher and doing elite things, does it make his argument for being the better player, a tougher one to make for fans?
I think it doesn't really do anything for him because he's done he has 83.5 sacks through 7 years. He's already done enough. He's had pretty much every award under his belt but Defensive Player of the Year, which he lost to Khalil Mack by 1 vote. And it was the biggest shock since the 2016 presidential election. But I don't think it's going to take anything away. And when you look at what Von Miller has done, he hasn't really had that bookend OLB helping him out. He's been double-teamed, triple-teamed, chipped at the line of scrimmage, whereas Khalil Mack has had Bruce Irvin. Last year he had Navarro Bowman helping him out a little bit. I think a better defensive line in terms of pass rushers. So I don't think Bradley Chubb, if he clicks, he's going to take anything away from Miller's legacy. He's only going to make life easier for Miller. And I think they're going to look at both of those players in separate situations.
Sure. Yeah, that's a typical Broncos analyst response right there. So no, I'm just kidding. I think that's fair. I think that's fair to say. I mean, I agree. I think Von Miller's, resume kind of speaks for itself at this point. I think it's kind of not one of those things that I would ever go back and be like, oh, what he did over the first 7 years doesn't matter as much now. Like that's not the point. I agree completely. I think that his pure playmaking ability and his ability to dominate a game is never in question. So.
Right.
Well, one point I'll make as devil's advocate in this conversation here is the fact that, last year, and you could argue 2016 as well, but especially last year, Von really had no help on the other side and no one really stepping up on the defensive line with the exception of Shelby Harris in terms of helping him create a consistent pass rush. But he had DeMarcus Ware for 2 years just wrecking shop. So he did have that benefit as opposed to what Khalil Mack has had to deal with in his short time, his brief career with the Raiders thus far.
True. No, I understand completely. I agree with you completely. And another good point actually to the Mack side of the argument is that while he's topped 10.5 sacks over the past 3 years, I think that the fact that he's going to be playing in Paul Guenther's defense this year, and the fact that they added guys like Maurice Hurst and moved Bruce Irvin to defensive end, and they have Arden Key and a few other players like that, I think it's really going to help Khalil Mack as well. And I think that this could be a big year that could really bolster his overall resume and really take him to that top level, right up there with Von Miller, in my mind at least.
I still think it's 1A and 1B. You can interchange them all you want. They both are phenomenal, and both are the best in the NFL.
Mm-hmm. Before I get to the next question here from the mailbag, while we're on the topic real quick, give us an update, the latest on Mac, his contract, what's going to happen there, how big of an issue it is in Oakland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big concern right now. I mean, obviously, it's not it's not the end of the world or anything like that. It's not like the expectation isn't that he's not going to sign or anything along those lines. But there is concern on the level of we're getting close to training camp. And if we get into training camp, then, we could be looking at a situation where he has very, very little time to work with Paul Guenther. And, Khalil Mack is an exceptional talent, as we've talked about. So it's not going to be the end of the world trying to get him, ready to roll and everything. But the negotiations, there's been no rumblings since very early on. So it's kind of impossible to tell where things sit currently. But the hope is that they'll get it done before training camp. But at this point, there's been nothing to make anyone feel great about that. So it's concerning still. It's definitely very concerning.
Yeah, I think it'll get done. He deserves to get paid. And just like Von Miller in 2016 after he won the MVP of the Super Bowl, he deserved that contract and he held out and he finally got it. So I think it'll go into July in a training camp, but it'll get done.
And I think part of it might be I'm pretty confident what a large portion of the issue is that you have, Aaron Donald, obviously, waiting to get paid too. And then Jadeveon Clowney too. So, I mean, these guys are basically in a spot where whoever signs first resets the market for the next person. So if Mac holds out until Aaron Donald gets paid, he's going to make more money. So, I mean, realistically, he does have incentive to keep pushing it back. But at some point, it's got to get to the point where it's got to be about football, and they got to get the deal done. All three of them have to just get the deal done. So,
yeah. Well, and typically it's the rubber meets the road when football officially gets back into full swing in training camp, and everyone's back in the office, so to speak, and that's when things typically tend to coalesce around holdouts. But second question, then we'll keep it to two questions from the mailbag today because I have Zach and I have 2 or 3 more we want to get to, Jeff, because we've ran a little bit long here. But this one comes from Mile High Maniac on Twitter. His question is, what's the deal with Amari Cooper and his drops? Can Broncos fans look forward to more of the same?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, I know Amari Cooper gets the brunt of it because of his drops, but the drops were a concern across the board really last year. Michael Crabtree had his issue with drops. Seth Roberts has consistently had his issues with drops, so it's very concerning, and it's not something that's just going to go away. I think really what it comes down to for Cooper is he's a young guy, and I think he kind of gets in his own head to some extent, and I think he just needs to go out there, get some of that confidence back, and basically just get build that rapport or rebuild the rapport to some extent with Derek Carr and basically just hit the ground running. I think if he hits the ground running and he can get some confidence under his feet, it's going to be a lot easier for him to avoid those drops and, keep it from being a consistent thing. But there is no, I have very, very little confidence in that happening immediately. I'm going to need to see it happen before I actually believe that it's going in the right direction, at least. So.
Broncos fans are all too familiar with this when you have Demaryius Thomas, who will drop the easiest pass in the world and make the best catch following that the next play.
Yeah.
So it's just
absolutely.
the give and take with a superstar receiver. And
exactly.
The Broncos fans could look forward to it, and they as an enemy fan base, they will. But Amari Cooper is still one of the best receivers in the NFL, and as long as he makes those catches, they're going to be in good shape, the Raiders offense.
Yeah, and his upside obviously is tremendous. I mean, the Broncos know the upside of Amari Cooper. I mean, they tried to kill him last year during a game. So that happened, and we all remember that. No, but for real, though, I mean, his upside is unreal. And just like you said, like Demaryius Thomas, these guys have tremendous upside, and while they make these mistakes, these plays that make fans be like, oh my God, I'm so done with Amari Cooper. 2 minutes later, Amari Cooper could go score a 60-yard touchdown, and everyone's just lost their mind, and they're pulling their Amari Cooper jersey out of the closet. So it's the way the NFL works, though. It's not Raiders fans, it's just fans in general. It's so easy to get frustrated with specific plays and things like that. It's hard not to as a fan, and even as an analyst, it's tough not to.
True that.
Definitely. Well,
sure.
The Broncos, they kept Vance Joseph, obviously, but they've made it a lot of personnel changes. Very different team as compared to last year. Most notably, of course, the acquisition of quarterback Case Keenum, which we've touched on briefly. I personally see Denver as a dark horse in the AFC West this year, but what's the perception, Jeff, of the Broncos in Oakland?
Yeah, obviously from the fan base, they just pretty much hate everything about the Broncos. So it's pretty much always negative, but you will find the, one or two, you'll find a handful of people who will throw their honest opinion out there. And I think the biggest question about the Broncos from the Raiders is probably, what do you really expect from Case Keenum? Do you think that he is the guy who can, be the same player he was last year? Or is he going to be kind of a middle of the road quarterback who's not going to be able to push you over the top and may even potentially hold you guys back from doing really, really special things when you have some impressive offensive weapons and an elite defense?
It's the same. Like Jeff made the great point about fan bases are in the NFL. It doesn't matter what color you wear, what team you rep. The fan base is going to be biased toward your players and very unbiased toward the other players. And the Broncos fans feel the same way about Derek Carr as Raiders fans feel about Case Keenum. They don't like him. And I don't think – this is where I deviate a little bit. I don't think Denver is a dark horse. I think the Raiders and the Broncos are kind of in the same level. They finished near the bottom last year in the division. It was kind of a step back for both teams. I think it's the Chargers' time to come up now. And the Raiders and the Broncos are kind of be battling for that that wild card spot. And you have the Chiefs in transition. So I don't think they're a dark horse. I think they're a playoff wild card contender dark horse, but it's going to be interesting to see how the rivalry does shape up with a new era now. When we have, Vance Joseph is on the hot seat. He's a lame duck head coach right now. There's no guarantee he's going to be there in 2019, but Jon Gruden with a 10-year contract more than likely will be. So it's going to be kind of a new era in the West. But for my money, and I have no hat in the ring, I do think the Chargers are the favorites right now in the West.
Oh, I can understand that. I definitely agree with you. I think the Chargers are probably the team to beat, and I think the Chiefs are kind of getting disrespected a little bit. I know Mahomes is hasn't proven much to this point, but he has some tremendous upside, and I don't think that the Chiefs would have made that deal and shifted it fully to Patrick Mahomes unless they were pretty confident in it. I mean, I know there's arguments and a reason to go the other way with that and say, hey, we have Mahomes, so why would we not go with him? But I think that Mahomes is probably more NFL ready than a lot of people think he is.
Beat the Broncos last year in the finale.
Yep, yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
sure.
Came in, won the game, came back out, let the other guy come in. Broncos started catching back up, tied the game. They threw him back out there to seal the deal. But I think that was kind of the death knell. I mean, the writing was on the wall for Alex Smith when the Mahomes pick was in, but that was kind of the death knell confirmation in the minds of the Chiefs that, it's time to move on to the next era. But getting back to the Raiders, though, give us an under-the-radar player on offense and defense for the Raiders that Broncos fans in particular should keep an eye out for in 2018.
You said offense and defense?
Yeah, one from each side of the ball.
Yeah, so honestly, I'll start with the defensive side. I think that I really think Maurice Hurst is probably going to be a great, great player. Obviously the only reason he slid to the 5th round is because of the heart condition, which was cleared by both Michigan and Harvard. So team doctors have looked at it. He said that he has to basically just get checked every year, but he's all clear. He's already getting work with the first team defense. I think he may legitimately prove to be in the mix with Bradley Chubb for, the rookie or defensive rookie of the year award. So I think Maurice Hurst has a ton of upside. I think that he could really thrive in Gunther's defense, which does, do a lot for defensive tackles. So I'm excited about Maurice Hurst. I think he's going to be really fun to watch, but I got to put him as like a 1A and 1B. I think Garyon Conley has the potential to be a lockdown cornerback. And the only thing that'll hold him back, I think, is whether or not the rest of the secondary can kind of help him out and do their part as well. Because he is technically still kind of a rookie because he only played very limited amount of snaps in 2 games. So on the offensive side, though, I really, really like Ryan Switzer, but I don't know if he'll do it this year, as I previously mentioned. There's just too many players at wide receiver currently. But I think if Ryan Switzer gets the snaps, I think he'll really impress and be the kind of guy who can move the sticks and possibly break things open. And it's a boring comparison, but kind of liking how Cole Beasley does for the Cowboys. I know he just came from the Cowboys and has drawn those comparisons, but he's the similar type of player, and he could be a great option for Derek Carr. But along with him, if I'm going to pick someone else, it would be Martavis Bryant, assuming everything is all good on the weird kind of front of whatever the heck is going on with that situation. I think Bryant in the contract year has a chance to really kind of put his stamp on the fact that, hey, the Steelers just didn't want to use me. They didn't want to give me the snaps, and I'm going to show just how dominant I really can be. So I think Bryant's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
I think it's impossible to say the Raiders had a good draft, but I think they definitely made two great steal picks in Hurst, like you mentioned, and also Arden Key, who reminds me so much of Alden Smith. And to get him, if he just keeps his nose clean, and if Hurst can stay healthy and his heart doesn't explode, I think they can both be really, really good contributors on that Raiders defense. And they really need defensive help. Their offense is fine, which goes back to our first question, is why they used two picks on offensive linemen in 3 rounds when they needed defensive help. So I was a big fan of the Hurst pick and also the Key pick.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because I feel like those two picks kind of almost saved the Raiders. Yeah, and made it so people didn't just completely destroy their draft, because if those two guys weren't available and they didn't take that tumble and you're looking at 2 other names there, that draft looks real bad for Oakland. It looks real bad. So
it was the only thing that saved it from an F+. It went to a D-.
Exactly. It's true. I mean, it's true, sadly, but it is true.
Well, hey, we've kept you long. We got one more for you here. It's kind of a prediction. Now, we won't necessarily ask for a record prediction here, Jeff, unless you've got one that you'd like to share. But at the very least, put on the prognosticator's hat just for a minute. Tell us what you expect on the horizon for the Oakland Raiders in 2018. I mean, is this a team to come on the come, so to speak, or do you feel like this is going to take a couple of years for Gruden to kind of exact his vision in Oakland?
Yeah, honestly, it's one of those situations where I could really, and it's a lame answer, but I could see them going anywhere from 6-10 to 11-5. So, I mean, things can. It's just there's so much to try to figure out and sort through in terms of, the AFC West. Is it as wide open as it seems, or are the Chiefs going to, be really good again? Or are the Chargers going to, live up to expectations? Do the Broncos, are they going to be able to hit that stride offensively, dominant defense? Because if this all comes together, then the Raiders are looking at 6-10, 7-9 potentially. But on the flip side, if these teams aren't as great as they possibly could be, I could easily see the Raiders going 10-6 and possibly winning the division or making the playoffs at the very least, based on the fact that their offense is so good. But if I had to predict right now, to avoid the 8-8 pick, because that's boring, I'll go with 9-7 for the Raiders.
Follow-up question. I know you don't have a crystal ball. If you did, you wouldn't be here talking to us right now. But 10-year contract, $100 million. How long do you think he lasts in Oakland?
Yeah, based on what I saw this offseason and the decisions that were made this offseason and how it was handled, he's going to have a really, really he's going to have a lot of rope to work with. He'd have to really, really mess up to lose his job in the first, 2-3 years. I think he's pretty much locked in to be there for 4 to 5 years. And if they make the playoffs just one time in the first, 2 seasons, 3 seasons, I think he'll be there for 6 to 7 at a minimum.
At the minimum?
Yeah.
Wow.
If he makes the playoffs. Because I think that if he makes the playoffs, it'll clear out any negative moves that were made, negative vibes that were there, and I think it's going to reset everyone's mind. Like, all right, hey, Jon Gruden's back, everything's cool, we got this under control, we're set now. So I think that'll probably be the way it goes. What do you guys think about that? How long do you think Gruden will last there, based on what you saw this offseason?
Well, he's got at least a couple of years. I think on that contract, he's probably going to get a minimum of 2 years. They'll fire Reggie McKenzie if things go sideways long before they'll fire Gruden, because that'll be the excuse as well. I don't have full control like I wanted, and da-da-da-da-da. I think he's got at least 2 years, but, to pin it down, I'd say probably no longer than 4 years if he doesn't turn the ship around.
Sure, I could definitely see that. That's a good prediction. What about you, Zach? What do you think?
That was my prediction. I think winning cures all in the NFL. I think he will, like Chad said, the scapegoat is always a general manager above him. He's not needed anymore. Jon Gruden runs that team, so they'll fire McKenzie if things go south. Sure. I think he'll have a minimum of 2. I know I'm just hopping on Chad's answer, but I think 4, is the most. If they don't win, if they just sneak into it's the difference between sneaking into the playoffs and winning the West. Between going 8-8 or 11-5, I think makes a big difference. So I think he'll get 4 years at the most and 2 at a minimum.
What if they win? What if they win the AFC West? Say they go 8-8 this year, then next year they win the AFC West. How much time beyond 2 years, that 2 year point, do you think that'll buy him?
I think that buys him 3 more. I think he'll get 5 years since that 10-year deal. He's not going to hit 10. I mean, that was just
no chance.
That was just a record-setting number to put out there to make it look good for the team and for Gruden. So I think 7, like you said, is pushing it. He'd have to win the West a couple times, or even more so than that. But if he wins the West next year, I think he gets 5. No more than that, though.
He might not even want to be there that long. Right. Who knows? I mean, I have no idea. What do you think, Chad?
I don't know, man. I think that he still has so much left to prove. He's been out of football for so long, and things just soured in such a weird way those final 2 or 3 years in Tampa. I mean, he at one point was one of the brightest NFL coaches under the sun, and then it just kind of got boring and monotonous, and he could not find a way to win in Tampa. So hopefully this time away, I mean, the good thing about what he's done, if you're a Raiders fan and you're looking for a silver lining, is he's been sitting in on meetings with these production meetings as an analyst for Monday Night Football now for however many years, close to a decade. And so he's been able to gather a lot of intelligence in that way on opposing teams, on other personnel across the league, on seeing from the inside some of the trends that are taking place in the NFL. So I think we'd be fooling ourselves a little bit to just assume that he's a fish out of water coming back to the NFL, because it's not like he's just been chilling on a beach somewhere. He has been involved in the game, and he's also had a very advantageous position in these pre-production meetings where they sit down for a couple hours and talk to the OC and sit down, talk to the DC and the stars of the team. And so you can believe that a football mind like Jon Gruden, when he gets an opportunity to sit down with these coordinators especially, he's asking them football questions, scheme questions. And, he's taken what he can from that. And it'll be interesting to see, though, how much of that he's able to apply. My personal belief is it's going to take a couple of years, even with the quarterback that they have in Derek Carr. But it wouldn't shock or surprise me, as you say. They're kind of in that weird zone. Like, they could be 6-10, they could go 11-5. Like, I would not be shocked by either eventuality. But again, it's boring. I think they're going to be pushing 500 in year one, is just my personal belief. But who knows?
Sure, that makes sense. Definitely, I can see that.
I'll say one more thing, and I'm showing my true colors here. But a Jon Gruden 10 years out of football is still better than Vance Joseph. So the Broncos or their fans have no room to talk about that.
Every Broncos fan listened and just nodded their head in the car.
I don't think many. I don't know the Broncos fan base too well, but I'm going to safely assume that they would not argue with that. So
you would be correct.
Well, hey, Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. We went a little bit long, but it was a very illuminating conversation, very edifying. We appreciate you joining the show. And hopefully when we get back to the season, we're definitely going to want to have you back on when the Broncos and the Raiders line up on the schedule. But thanks for joining us, bro.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Find him on Twitter, you guys. Go behind enemy lines. Know your enemy. It's important. On Twitter, at JSM, the number 8ITH. At JSM8ITH. His name is Jeff Smith. He covers the Raiders for 24/7 Sports. Take care, buddy. But that's going to do it for today's show. I think we did good work here today. You can find my partner, Zack Kelberman, on Twitter, at Kelberman 24/7, myself at Chad N. Jensen. As always, the best way to get a direct response from us is to hit us up on the MHH Insiders premium message board on the site. But we're always going to try to engage with you, our listeners, as often as we can on social media. So don't be shy about asking us questions. Continue to do so. And again, we're working towards doing something live, some live shows on YouTube. Stay tuned for that. But here's a reminder. Call to action, support Mile High Huddle, support 24/7 Sports, become a VIP subscriber. And speaking of subscribing, make sure you're doing so to the podcast, y'all. For Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you soon.
Mile High Huddle.